So, it came out this week, maybe late last week, that the VTT, virtual tabletop from Wizards of the Coast, named now Project Sigil from originally D&D 1, has been shelved or moved into a difficult to get place on Dungeons & Dragons Beyond. I made a video about this back in, 2021 or 2022 when they announced D&D 1 on my old channel, Kevin Newman, Fox Newman. I haven't posted on that in a while. I've been concentrating on Brackenberries' channel. And at the time, I did outline some of the concerns that people would have with it actually coming to fruition, because they had tried something similar with 4th edition and then abandoned it near the end or halfway through or whatever. And what this sort of signals is, and other things that Wizards of the Coast has done, signals, people making poor decisions and having a lack of commitment. And the poor decision is not to make the virtual tabletop. Could be a good decision. And in fact, I thought at the time it was a great decision that you could take the essence of Dungeons & Dragons and create a framework to use that essence online. That's essentially what virtual tabletops do, and they do it quite well. And with the resources of Wizards of the Coast, they can make one that looks quite nice, and they could create a marketplace in which people could use the virtual tabletop to create their campaigns, their different storylines or adventures or whatever, or even just maps, locations, and even going further as designing textures and that kind of stuff. And then Wizards, much like with, was it the Dungeon Masters Guild or whatever the website is, where you can buy old Dungeons & Dragons products and new Dungeons & Dragons products digitally, where they just take a slice off the top, like a 5 or 10% or something like that. You could have people designing endlessly for this thing, and really your own obligation is just to provide the platform for that and to update it from time to time. But they seem to have lacked the will, much like they did with E1. So they bought E1, which was a studio, and one presumes that they investigated this studio before they bought it and to find whether it had the capability to make the things that they wanted to make, i.e. movies, television shows. And then they didn't invest in it more by bringing in people who could write good stories and create the sets, the production and that kind of stuff, and get something to the end. I mean, they did make the Dungeons & Dragons movie, but that Dungeons & Dragons movie was just okay. And instead of now improving on E1, because they were having problems with their stock price and the sales and that kind of stuff, they decided to sell E1 for a massive, massive loss, instead of just holding on to it and improving it and waiting for the economy to improve. Now, one could say maybe they took advantage of opportunity costs. They sold E1 for a loss, but everything was in a loss at that point in time. So the value of it is relative to the economic conditions of it. And if they could pay down their debt with rising interest costs, so maybe that was a good decision. But I don't know. I would at least have some commitment to something, right? They have commitment to, I guess, Magic the Gathering and continually making product for that, and Dungeons & Dragons, and then some of their other stuff. But when it comes to innovating, they seem to get very squirrely about their innovation. They're excited at first. And so this is another problem, is that you design a virtual tabletop, and if you don't have the commitment for it, or you are maybe unsure at the risk and outcomes, then don't announce it. Just see if it's viable, and then have some internal testing, and then some, internal testing with external sources that sign NDAs, and see how it's going. And then you have more data to work off and to decide whether it's something that's viable. I mean, and you have data from Dungeon Masters Guild and other marketplaces to tell you how much money that can bring in. But instead, they spend all this time and effort and money on a virtual tabletop, and then they lay off 90% of the staff, which, if costs are overrunning, that's fine. But, you have something you've paid for that now is stalled in its infancy and isn't going to go anywhere unless you invest some time, some effort, some money into it, or you've just wasted all of that. And that could have gone to other innovations you could have looked at. And I don't know, it's just strange. It's another opportunity cost. And maybe there is some plan to do something with this virtual tabletop, or maybe it's just put on hiatus, or maybe it's just completely dead. And it just seems odd, considering they bought Dungeons & Dragons Beyond, and Dungeons & Dragons Beyond is great and all, but its value is mostly in its potential. And for some of us anyway, the reason I joined Dungeons & Dragons Beyond is because I eventually wanted a virtual tabletop. If there's no virtual tabletop attached to Dungeons & Dragons Beyond, then it's just it's an interesting tool, whatever. And I spent money on the books that are now relegated to a sort of EU status or Legends status, because we're now in 2014 Dungeons & Dragons, and I certainly won't be buying any further Dungeons & Dragons books to add to Dungeons & Dragons Beyond if there's no virtual tabletop coming. So I don't see that their purchase of Dungeons & Dragons Beyond, which was also purchased at the height of a market, I don't see that being something that is now viable, as in, I don't think they're going to make their money back from it, and maybe they'll have to spin off Dungeons & Dragons Beyond, and then maybe that comes with Sigil, and then maybe a third party that buys it then actually realizes it. So I guess I'm okay if it results in that, but I'd rather have an official source that handles all of this. And I guess, I had these hopes for what it would be. I'm not in any way emotionally attached to it. It's just, I kind of wanted those books to be, part of this virtual tabletop, an easy, seamless experience. And I didn't care necessarily about the 3D aspect of it. They were a little bit too ambitious with it, I think. They could have done a basic virtual tabletop with a lot more innovative stuff that connected Dungeons & Dragons Beyond to it. And then later, as it showed that it could generate revenue, then they could improve upon that. They didn't have to start in Unreal Engine and create this 3D moving models type thing. They could have just, started small and worked their way up, but they decided to, go all in on it. And then they used Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine can do a lot more than what they did with it. And I think the time and money that's required to make what they made is similar to just having 3D graphics. Or they could have spent a little bit less and not used Unreal Engine and, as I said, used some sort of 2D virtual tabletop and upgraded from there. It's just very strange that Wizards of the Coast does this kind of stuff. I mean, okay, so corporations do this a lot, where they acquire something, they have all these plans, and then they move people around, and either through attrition or layoffs, or in the case of the CEO of Wizards of the Coast leaving, the people that had the vision for this may have all been the people that are no longer there and the people that are currently there don't really care about the project that much. But really, the project cost a lot of money and time. So even if you're not passionate about it, I mean, you should probably care about it. It's just very strange to me that this is another time that this kind of thing has happened. Maybe make the decisions better in the beginning, so then you don't have to, lose a lot of money on the project falling apart because you lacked commitment to it. So the virtual tabletop is dead for now because I don't see many people using it. I mean, let me know if you've used it, you like it, and maybe over time people do use it even at its bare bones, and maybe that gets someone at Dungeons & Dragons energized at reviving it. But for now, the virtual tabletop is dead, and I'm not surprised based on past history, but, it would have been cool to have an official Dungeons & Dragons tabletop, and what they were showing us was sort of cool and something I would have enjoyed using, but now probably won't. So that's Wizard of the Coast for you. Abandoning projects. Have a good day.